welcome to San Diego Comic-Con at Home 2020. I'm Sam Maggs, and I am so excited to be your host today for our wonderful panel, PS NPC Storytelling in Video Games. I am joined today by pros from across the industry who have, I'm sure, very fun, maybe terrifying, who knows, stories to share with us about storytelling and narrative in video games. I would love to start by having everyone introduce themselves. I want to ask everyone who you are, what your credits are, and I would love for you to include one game that you're playing right now. So I'll start, so you have a second to think about it. My name is Sam Maggs. I've been a writer for BioWare and Insomniac Games, and now I am a freelance writer in games, which is super fun. I also have a couple books out in June and July, one called Conquest and one called The Unstoppable Wasp, Built on Hope. And I'm actually playing a demo right now that you can grab on Steam of a game called Game Director, where you get to be a game director for your own video game. Essentially, the whole game takes place in Slack, and you're making decisions that can either make or break your game. The demo is super fun. You should all try it. Let's go. I'm going to be a little more... I'm going to be like, you speak now, because it's a little hard on Zoom. I would not normally be like this. I'm normally more chill, but we'll go to Shayna next.
Sure. Hi, my name is Shayna Moon. In the past, I worked on God of War 2018 as the audio producer. Also had the pleasure of working with the narrative team at Santa Monica Studio for a number of years. And I'm currently a technical producer at Unity. And right now I'm actually have gotten back into like Assassin's Creed very recently. I just started replaying Assassin's Creed Odyssey specifically as Alexios this time. And I would love to talk about my experience with that.
Love a himbo. Love that for us. Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Fausti. I just spent my last 2 years with Respawn, where I worked on Jedi Fallen Order. I also worked on Battle Chef Brigade earlier than that. And as for a game I'm playing right now, currently pretty obsessed with Kingdom 2 Crowns. My partner and I have played through every version now, and we actually did our first all-nighter since like college the other night playing it. So having a lot of fun.
That's when you know a game is good. Milo.
Oh, hi, my name is Milo Smiley. I'm a game writer and producer. Last year, I had the amazing opportunity to work on Spider-Man Miles Morales as a writing intern at Insomniac, and I just started this week as a production intern at Blizzard on classic games. Right now, I'm playing a lot of classic Tetris, honestly. I'm pretty tired after like a day's work, so I just like to like lay in bed and just like play Tetris and chill, and it's pretty nice.
I love Milo. I think you have the best name, Milo Smiley. It sounds like a video game protagonist is what it sounds like. That's what I always think. Charles.
Hi, I'm Charles Beecham. I am a writer for Mythical Games. We are a relatively new studio based up in Seattle. We put out the trailer for our first game a week ago today as of our recording. So I'm working on a game called Blankos Block Party. Super stoked about it. It's a MMO game, but it's got some builder stuff in it, and it's really cool. I hope you guys all check it out. But before that, I worked as a narrative editor for Activision, working on the Destiny franchise. So I did a lot of work on ancillary narrative content, which was awesome. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And games that I'm playing right now, I have a 3-year-old. So we're playing a lot of Mario Party right now, which she's super into. And then for myself, Fallen Order Plus mode is kind of my jam right now. Nice. On my Star Wars gear.
Mario Party's iconic. Yeah, it's good. Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Scharr. I'm a project lead writer at Harebrained Schemes, also in Seattle. Before that, I worked on the Destiny franchise with Charles. I was there from Taken King through the Forsaken expansions. And what I'm playing right now, honestly, kind of like Milo, I like trying to do like little comfort games right now. So a lot of Minecraft. And also I'm playing Don't Starve Together, just to keep in touch with some friends in this weird coronavirus world, which is like the opposite of a comfort game in that it is awesome, but it's also extremely stressful. But it's really good.
I'm playing a lot of Apex Legends, and I also find it very comforting, but also very like stressful and anger-inducing at the same time. Maybe that's like the outlet we need right now, is like to de-stress by being angry at something like benign. I guess. Yeah, cool. The world is cool.
There's nothing like anxiety to help you fight your anxiety, right? Like,
This is a panel of very highly anxious people. I think maybe game narrative is a very highly anxious career indeed. So, which is what's really interesting about this panel, I think, is that when people think about narrative in games, they think writer. Like, there are game writers, which is true, but even that job as a writer can vary pretty greatly from game to game, depending on if you're working on something with branching narrative, a battle royale, something linear, if you're a junior writer, if you're a senior writer, if you're a lead writer. So that has many facets. But then we're also working with narrative producers, narrative QA, editors. Like, there are so many different careers within game narrative that I feel like maybe people aren't familiar with. So what I would love to do is, maybe starting in opposite order, we'll start with Jill this time, is talk about what is a day in the life of your particular position in games look like, and kind of extrapolate that maybe a little bit over, like, what does it look like over the course of the life of a game, potentially. I mean, as brief as possible. We only have 45 minutes, but like, you know, give us the high level bullet points on what your job is and what it means. So let's start with Jill.
It can be so many different things depending on the day. Now that I'm at a smaller studio, I definitely get to wear a lot more hats, which is really nice. In larger studios, my experience was that folks are so often specialized that you kind of focus on, like, I did mostly like writing, you know, just like writing the words was my job previously. And now it's a lot more than that. I work more, do some, you know, implementation, actually getting the lines to play, working with designers on the levels. You know, it can be anything like, what is the context of this space that the characters are in? How should they react here? I've worked with a team of writers, and so, you know, we edit each other's stuff, like, a lot of dialogue review, or you know, working with other folks to just like look at, a lot of it is like looking at teammates' work and just sort of trying to contextualize it for, like, how would the characters in this lived world feel about what they're seeing around them.
That's super interesting. Yeah. And that was at Bungie, you were like a writer or like senior writer. What was your title?
I started as an associate. And when I started, I was pretty much focused just on gear strings. So naming all of the things and like all the UI text, and from like basically anytime you saw it, like text on the screen, someone like had to touch it and you know, figure out, make sure it made sense, make sure that the player can understand, what is this piece of gear or this perk going to do. And so that's what I started doing, and then kind of expanded from there into more different types of dialogue, and then into like mission dialogue and some cinematics. And so when at that point I was a senior writer at Bungie, and then switching to a smaller studio, had more flexibility, first as a senior writer at Harebrained Schemes, and then project lead writer.
Cool. No, that's awesome. Yeah. How about you, Charles?
So my career in games started again working on ancillary narrative content as a narrative editor with Activision. So I was sitting at Bungie working on the Destiny franchise, but like I helped to launch the comic books. So I'd sit with the writers and the design team and talk about, okay, what do we have planned? What is the story that we're going to be telling? And then, okay, how do we take that story and support it outside of the game with comics, and maybe help set that up. So there was a lot of, you know, I'd sit in the room as we were breaking story and figuring out what those stories were going to be and giving input there, and then taking those pieces and working with another team of outside creators to tell stories in that way. from there, and like I said, now I'm working for Mythical Games, again, a small studio similar to what's going on with Jill. I wear so many different hats. In the last couple of months, I've helped write dialogue or voiceover dialogue for trailers. I have helped make marketing tools that we use to go out and as we're seeking out partners for working in our, bringing content into our game. And of course, I'm writing dialogue for the game and helping to write missions and quests and all of that stuff that you usually associate with writing or story in a game. But now I wear a lot of different hats, and it's a lot of fun to stretch a lot of different muscles and to be able to be a writer, writing for lots of different things. So, yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah, Milo, I would love to hear, I know you've only been a production intern for 1 week, so this may be a little premature, but I would love to hear the difference between what your experience was like as a narrative writer intern versus now a producer intern.
Absolutely, yeah. I would definitely say it's a lot different. When I was a writing intern, a lot of what I was working on initially was getting acquainted with the story and figuring out how I could factor my writing style into everybody else's, so it created still a seamless piece and didn't feel like I was a new voice coming into the project. Alongside that, I collaborated a lot with designers on as people have mentioned before, figuring out when a character needs to talk in a mission or what they need to say, what the general vibe of a level will be, and then iterating on that piece of writing with the writers until it was good enough to be potentially voiced and then put into the game. Now, as a production intern, most of what I've been doing is a lot of one-on-ones to meet everybody on the team and sort of understand just where everyone's at in the current project and what everybody does. Just because there's so many people working on so many different things right now, I need to understand what is happening in order to sort of implement my project most effectively without stepping on any toes or getting anything mixed up.
That's such a huge part of a narrative producer's job too, is to be aware at all times of what everyone is doing so that you can make sure that everyone has what they need to succeed. And if they don't, how to whip leadership into shape to make sure that they do. How about you, Megan? I'd love to hear about your time on Jedi and what your role was like there.
Yeah, so my role was kind of interesting because I was the only in-house writer on the project. So we had other contract writers, but they literally couldn't play a build of the game. So basically, a typical day could look like writing cinematics, writing beats, writing in-game VO and dialogue, going to the performance cap shoots and giving feedback there where the actors are actually in their mocap suits, doing the cinematic acting for the game. Sorry, I have a cat trying to chew my cables.
It only improves the panel, I would say.
I think so. He's a sweet boy. He's picking his time to be rambunctious. But yeah, so sitting in on VO sessions and giving feedback there, just basically any piece of writing that you can name in that game would be something that I worked on. So it's everything, kind of any little piece of narrative, as well as other people have mentioned, sitting down and talking with level designers about what their goals are for their specific levels, trying to make sure that we're on the same page about what we're trying to deliver, collaborating with narrative designers who are different than writers at Respawn. They're more typical traditional game designers with hard technical skills. So collaborating with them to make sure that we can deliver narrative in a new and satisfying way, collaborating with dialogue designers to make sure that we're implementing dialogue correctly, constantly talking with audio to kind of decide what our VO pipeline is going to look like. So yeah, in addition to all of the writing parts, there's so much collaboration that happens and so much that you're just constantly talking and checking in with other teams.
Actually glad you mentioned being able to play a build of the game, because I think that's something that is really unique to video games, is that you can write in a document in Excel or in Final Draft, but until it gets hooked up and you can actually play through it in the game, first with Robo Voice, which is basically terrible Siri, and then with which is also kind of hard to judge by because timing isn't right and jokes don't play right and it's really long and slow, and then with the real voice, and it's hard to tell if stuff is actually working or making sense or if jokes are landing or if timing works. Being able to get your hands on what you've written is key in the iteration process, and that I feel that's really unique to games. I'm glad you brought that up. And Shayna, I'm so interested to hear about how audio fits into all of this, because of course nobody reads really the words. We hear it, right? It's all, we get great voice actors. And how does that come to be? And how do you make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that I want to kind of emphasize about production when it comes to this kind of content is that a lot of what you're doing as a producer is trying to anticipate the need that your teams are going to have kind of looking forward. You kind of live in two different time zones of like, you know, there's the things that I think every producer does where on a day-to-day basis, they're looking at, you know, what needs to be done today, what's blocked right now, what needs to be supported right now, what fires are there. But then you're also thinking about like, hey, 3 months from now, are we going to have everything we need in order to do this big VO session? You know, if we're going to bring in an actor who's like, you know, we're spending a lot of money on their time, we want to make sure that everything's going to be ready for them. So I would say one of the things I really like about being a producer is that your days are very rarely sort of typical days. There's always new problems to solve. And yeah, when it comes to sort of bringing together audio, you know, that comes comes in at the end of the game, and everything else needs to kind of be supported by audio. And so your job is to have this really high level holistic view of where the project is at, and you know, being able to figure out problems before they become problems and try to sort of head them off at the pass. And I think that as a producer, you kind of start to get this sense of like, oh, I just heard about this thing from this person, and I just heard about this thing from this person, and they don't think that they're related, but they absolutely are.
Yeah, that's why it's good to have producers who can connect all of those dots, because each person working on a game is so narrowly focused on like the one thing that they of 300 people are supposed to be focused on, which is how it should work. But without someone connecting all of that, things can fall off the rails pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that my best interactions with developers sometimes are when they are obviously like very focused on the thing that they're doing, but they have enough kind of awareness of what's going on around them where they can say like, hey, maybe you should talk to this person because I think I might impact them. And then as a producer, you're really empowered to go and like have those conversations.
Yeah, that's cool. Maybe we had this question in a couple of different forms from folks on Twitter. Since we don't have a live audience, I thought I would go to Twitter to ask folks if they had questions for game writers. We got this from Kate Leth and from Maggie and from a bunch of folks in different forms. And it was kind of a manifestation of a question that I was going to ask as well. But what does game writing actually look like? Like when you sit down and you're like, I'm going to write a video game, like both in terms of things, both in terms of process, like how do you get from like grand idea to like game, and also in terms of like tools, like what do you use to make a video game? Because it's different at every studio. So yeah, maybe we can start with Charles.
Yeah. So this being my first gig, actually being a writer in games, it's really interesting. So I came from comic books, like I said, and my story brain thinks in script format. So and I always start with an outline. So you know, when I came on at Mythical, like I sat down with our CCO and we talked about story, and we talked about, hey, this is the world that these characters live in. And then I sat down with a blank document and just like started writing things and figuring out this is what the story is going to be, and this is how it's all going to work. And then from there it was like, okay, now I have pieces of content, I have quests that we're going to have players playing through, and I look at that as, here's a scene, right? And I'm writing to that scene. This is the action, and these are the words that are said, and this is the choice that the person has. They choose yes, and then we do the thing. You know, we do this other thing, and that starts another scene. But then at some point, those words have to get into the game, and most designers aren't looking at a script. They don't want to see a script. They need it in a table or something, right? And so, you know, for me, I'm then going and putting all of my, you know, my bits of dialogue strings into the game engine. And at different studios that looks different. In some places it's basically you're working in a fancy Excel sheet that populates everything into the game. And in other places, you're working directly in Unity, and you have a little dialogue box where you go in and, you know, you put the words in Unity and then hope that your connections are all right and it all works. But yeah, my process always starts with a script, and then I have to make it work for the rest of my team. So.
I'm really glad you brought up outlines, because I think something that a lot of people don't realize about games is that there are just so many stakeholders that you have to get on board with what you're making before you can actually start to make it. So I was like lead writer on the Ratchet Clank game that was just announced for the last year and a half, which was super fun. But, you know, not only do I have to get my creative director on board with the story, and the game director, like whoever is in charge of the game, but then also the executives in charge of the studio who, you know, want to make sure that you're making something that aligns with the vision of the studio. But then often also you have to get alignment with the publisher. So in that case, Sony, like all the head honchos at Sony have to be like, yeah, we do want to give you millions of dollars to make this thing that's on this piece of paper that you wrote. Like and then beyond that, there's the team itself that actually has to make the game. And if they don't want to make what you have on the piece of paper, they're gonna be miserable and the game's gonna suck. Like you have to make sure that like everyone from the art director to QA is stoked on this thing that you're creating, and an outline is really, really key, I think, in making that. And I also wanted to share my screen for a second before we move on, because you mentioned scripting. I think a lot of people work in Final Draft, especially for cutscenes or like Shayna and Megan were talking about, like performance capture when you get onto a stage with an actor. But a lot of the time, especially for banter and barks, which are like things that play during the mission, you're working in these massive Excel spreadsheets. Milo, what was your experience of as an intern, that process of like you wrote something, getting into the game? How did that work for you?
Absolutely, yeah. So what would happen is I would get the Jira first for the task, but then I would talk to whoever I'm working with on the task, or like whatever part of the game I'm influencing. Like if design wanted me to help them write for a side mission, I'd talk to the designer about like what happens in this side mission, like who's present, what needs to occur, what are the general like emotional feelings that you were going for with this mission. Like I want to make sure that I understand the player experience goals before I even like start writing anything. And then outside of that, I'll do like a few passes on a first draft, like just making sure that I'm hitting all of these player experience goals and also answering everything that needs to happen. Like Sam mentioned, there's like a million things that trigger in a mission, and like characters need to react to like everything that is happening. So you have to make sure that you're getting everything and it's all happening at the right times. Beyond that, once it's been like reviewed for feedback and actually like in the game, I'll test the mission probably like 10 to 20 times just to make sure everything sounds like normal. It's not too long or too short, and it's like triggering at the correct times so it makes sense in context.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Megan? What does your kind of process look like?
Yeah, so we had two pretty different processes for our cinematic pipeline versus our like VO pipeline, which would be kind of like the in-game, the quests, the things like that. So for like cinematics in the main game, we started with a beats document, which is a little bit more fleshed out than an outline. And the reason that we needed to do it that way was because in addition to partners that we were working with in our studio, we also had Lucasfilm as our partners, and they needed to be able to approve everything that we were doing from a very early phase. So once we had that beats document, we would take the little bits out of there that we were like, okay, this one line about Cal coming back with his broken lightsaber, that has to be a cinematic, right? So we would determine what the cinematics were from that beats document. And then we actually went to the task of starting to write those cinematics. We actually did our VO pipeline pretty much after our cinematics, which I don't totally recommend. Ideally, you would be doing those things in tandem if you have time and resources, because it leads to a lot of problems.
Never happened on any game.
Yeah, you know. Game writing, that's another thing, is that you're always up against some kind of horrible deadline that doesn't make any sense, and everything is terrible and wonderful at the same time. As for VO, basically what we would do is we had level design had actually been on the project for a couple of years before any narrative people were hired. So a lot of these levels were really nicely built out for us. So what I would do is sit down, play through a level, earmark all the different places where I thought there should be some kind of like conversation or some place that narrative should go. Then I would write all that out into a first pass, talk to the level designer about it. We would kind of go through the level together to make sure that like everything was firing the way it needed to, that we weren't kind of encountering mobs of enemies while the dialogue was trying to play, you know, things like that. And then just kind of do that as many times as you needed to in order to make sure that you had something that looked really, really polished, and make sure that you were also thinking about it. You know, the game is one arc, a level is a smaller arc within itself. So if you know that Zepho is between this cinematic and that cinematic, and you understand the character's emotional states and those different bookends, then you need to make sure that you're also serving some kind of arc that gets you from that point A to point B, and also reiterating any information the player might have forgotten if they watched the front cinematic and then turn off the game for like a month or something and then are coming back.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Shayna, what about you? What does your process look like?
Yeah, so
what tools do you use?
So so it's interesting thinking about kind of, because I think that audio adapts a lot to what other teams decide to use. And so a lot of the times when you as the audio team are trying to figure out, you know, how much VO coverage do we need to have, you know, if we have some kind of creature in a cinematic, that's not just somebody generating a sound effect, that is also like bringing in VO actors, all this kind of stuff. So a lot of what I would do as a producer is kind of take all these different sources of information and really condense them down into one source of truth that my audio lead could use as a reference. And so, you know, we'd be getting, because it's like you said, with different types of narrative in games, there's different types of ways that they're put together. Like a cinematic would have a script, a combat bark would be in an Excel sheet probably, but when we're bringing in the actors, they could be doing a mixture of those things. So generally, I think we would just use like a spreadsheet and we would just be checking off lines. One thing I do want to call out from the spreadsheet that you shared is there's a lot of stuff about kind of the actor performance generally that writers help to contribute. Another thing that I did not experience until I was actually sitting in a session in the booth is that is the projection of the actor. So if you're in like a tiny enclosed cave, that requires a different amount of like, it's not just about volume, it's also just about like how far it sounds like a person is trying to talk. So, you know, if you have somebody out in the middle of a field versus in a cave, or in like, if they're trying to hide, it's very different. And when you're talking about combat barks, you might have to say the same bark, but be in all those different places. And so you could have like a lookout near, a lookout far, that kind of thing. So it gets really, really granular. And as a producer, it's definitely your job to be tracking every single one of those little line items.
Yeah, and Milo knows this, but on Spider-Man, like every single line that Spider-Man had, we had to record twice for if he was standing still or if he was swinging through the city, and that the like volume of lines and the coding, like they did an amazing job, very intense. Jill, I'm curious what kind of tools you guys use and what your process was like.
Yeah, it can change so much, like just then it's the same game, even depending on what type of content you're working on. Like Megan used the word ideally, which is like kind of game design in a nutshell. Right now, I most often using Excel, like in your example. Definitely used Final Draft or other like similar programs. There's some free ones for cinematics, things like that. Different companies, like some have proprietary engines and some use the like you know, more broadly available tools like Unity or Unreal. Working in Unity right now, which has been really great. So it depends so much, or even like how, you know, whether it's you know, sometimes it's like, okay, we have the chance to build this level or this piece of content from the start, and then that starts off with a lot of pitching, a lot of specs that need to get all the appropriate sign off. Sometimes it's, hey, we have this art, we have this level, we got to use it, and also, you know, you can only have this actor or that you know, that weapon or something like that. Like you have these constraints. It's like, I like used the Chopped metaphor before, like that show Chopped, where like they give you a bunch of ingredients and you have to figure out how to make something with like the crazy shit that they've given you. Can I say that? Sorry. That's what it is a lot of the time. It's Chopped. You just have to like figure out how to make something yummy from what is on your plate.
I love that example. Yeah, I think people don't also know about how much iteration this stuff goes through, because like once you write it and it goes through several drafts and then it gets into the game, then people are playing it and they're like, this blows, and then there's like a bunch more iteration, and you're like, you learn very quickly to not be precious about anything, because it's going to change probably 700 times over the span of 6 years from the first time you make it to like what ships in the box. For people who are wondering like what's a good tool to learn how to write for games, I always recommend Twine. It's a free tool online. You can basically make your own text, like choose your own adventure style game. It's super, super easy to teach yourself and to learn. And it's also really easy to like complete something. So I actually used a Twine game as my writing sample for BioWare when I got hired there. Like studios look at that as a example of like, oh, this person understands like what branching narrative is, how you can make a narrative with choices, how you can make an interactive narrative. Like it's a really good tool to play with if you want to like literally make your own indie game with no outside help. A super good tool to use. We're coming up on the end of our time, which is wild. But I had a great question. There's so many more great questions that came in. I wish we could get to them all. But I basically just want to know, do you have a favorite line or moment that made it into any one of your games? Or like, do you have a favorite moment in game design that you love, that you got to make? This is maybe a hard question. I may be putting you guys on the spot. Or what's your favorite thing about being in games narrative? I would love to know that. Mine is the fact that games are so interactive and not passive. It means that you can like relate to these characters and connect with these characters so much more closely and intimately than you do with like a character in a movie. And I think that that's what makes games really, really special and what makes me want to work in games. Yeah, let's go. Shayna.
I think players encountering and players' reaction, that's like the most insane thing. I think that we spend so much time on these things that we see all the flaws in them, and then, you know, you get it out there, and yeah, you get negative stuff, but a lot of times a lot of that is noise. And when if just one person gets what you're trying to say, it makes basically everything you've been through worth it.
Absolutely. Megan.
I would say that games allow a certain amount of empathy that other storytelling mediums just don't have, because you're not physically playing. You don't say, this is me when you read a book, you know, but when you are playing a game, you say, this character is me. And I think that that is both wonderful. It imbues us with a lot of responsibility as well, because we need to really, really make sure that we're working hard to advance the medium in terms of representation, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But it also, that's kind of the best thing about it, because you get to really push for those things in a space that is so interactive.
I love that. Absolutely. Milo.
I would definitely agree with Shayna in that like the best part of game writing, or at least my favorite part, is like seeing players' reactions. My senior capstone project recently shipped, and I was the lead writer on it, and just seeing players react to like all of the different narrative pieces that I like put into it, including really, really subtle stuff that I didn't think players would get or understand, has just been like so rewarding. And it's just like, wow, like seeing people enjoy my work is just like very fulfilling for me.
Absolutely. Charles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can add much those between Megan, Milo, and Shayna's points. That really hits it on the head for me. I think about my favorite moments as a player, right? My favorite games, Ico. I loved Breath of the Wild, and then again, huge Star Wars fan, so Fallen Order. The things that are in common, vastly different games, right? But the things that are in common for each of those games for me is how deeply connected I felt to the characters as I was playing those games. Yeah. And just the delivery of that fantasy for me, making me feel like I am a part of this world. And that's what I always want to do in anything that I'm writing. And I think that games are unique in that we get to put people in the place of the character and to be in the world in that way. So yeah.
Absolutely. Jill.
Yeah, co-signing what everyone just said. I would just add that, like, for me, it's like you get to have almost like more of an intimacy with the characters than is really possible in a lot of other mediums. I mean, like, you get different versions of the same characters. Like, it kind of feels like however big your cast is that you're working with, it's even bigger than that, because each character can contain different multitudes based on the player's choices or circumstances of the game. You get to interact with the characters in the way, like, just the interactivity of not even just picking dialogue options, but using the relic of this specific hero. Like, you get to hold it in your hand, you get to fight with it. Like, that's really cool. Like, I mean, Jedi Fallen Order, like, I spent a lot of time modifying Cal's lightsaber, like, based on how I felt like his mood was at that point in the campaign. That's something that you don't get in any other kind of story. So that specific level of interactivity and intimacy with the characters, and just figuring out every little detail of a character's lived experience in this interactive world is my favorite part.
I love that. I totally agree. I wish we could talk about this all day. I have found all of this super interesting, and we did have a ton more really interesting questions. But if you still want them answered, or if you have some questions of your own, you can find all of us online. We are very friendly, I promise, for the most part. So we're just going to go around and remind you of who we are and where you can find us. My name is Sam Maggs. I also write books and comic books, which you can purchase for money. I'm just my name, at Sam Maggs, 2 M's on Twitter and Instagram, and I hope to see you there. Let's go, Megan.
Hey, I'm Megan Fausti. I wrote for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Battleship Brigade. You can find me on Twitter. You can either search my name, or my @ is Coriander, KHORIANDER, or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, Milo.
Oh yeah, like Sam mentioned, I'm thankfully pretty Googleable. If you want to learn more about my work, I wrote on Spider-Man Miles Morales, and on Twitter you can find me at MLSmileyDev, so SMILEYDEV.
Awesome. Yeah, Jill.
I'm Jill Scharr, and I previously worked on the Destiny franchise, now working on a new project with Harebrained Schemes. And you can find me on Twitter, just my name, no spaces, no underscores.
Sweet. Charles.
Yeah, I'm Charles Beecham. I worked on the Destiny franchise, and now I'm working for Mythical Games on Blankos Block Party. You can find me on all social media at CL Beecham, BEACHAM.
Awesome. And Shayna.
Yeah, I'm Shayna Moon. I was audio producer on God of War 2018, and I'm currently a tech producer with Unity. You can find me pretty much most social media. I'm at QORQUIQ, or just search my name. I'm also pretty Googleable. And I love to talk about production. I kind of never shut up about it. So if you have questions about that, feel free. I love helping people who are interested in learning more about games and game production.
Games are only getting bigger. There will only be more jobs in games, and we need your voice and your unique perspective and point of view. I encourage everyone watching this panel to try their own hand at game writing, get twine, try your hand at a script, try writing a bunch of different combat barks. You can see how weird and strangely challenging it is in a way you might never expect. Please do it. All of us can't wait to work with you. So thank you so much for joining us here at San Diego Comic-Con at Home 2020, and we will see you next year, maybe actually in Hall H. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.